Now, let's talk about the last principle, which is efficiency. Specifically, efficiency of your body. Not using as little as possible to create as much leverage on the gun, to solidify the gun in space without you having to do as much work, or making more use of the work that you're doing. So with that, we start from the elbows back. Elbows through the core, through the rest of the body, right? What we want is what I call neutral. As much energy as it takes for you to hold the gun in front of your face and not get pushed back in recoil, right? So as far as our stance goes, we would get wide, a little wider than shoulder width, we'd offset our feet. And what we do is we would bend our knees and then we would push our butt out, right? So we have this lean forward that's going to resist recoil and any movement of the gun too. So the weight of my body, the center of gravity of my body is just behind the balls of the feet, but just in front of the shin bone, if that makes sense. Now, if I am too straight up, and you guys will see on the back of my shoulders here, if you watch this line, and I push the gun out hard, right, my shoulders move back. Common thing that I see, you tell somebody to bend their knees, they bend their knees and their back straightens. So bend your knees, stick your butt out. And now, when I do this, push the gun out, my shoulders don't move at all. I can push this gun out as hard as I want, and the gun is not going to go anywhere, right? So that's the elbows back, neutral. What it takes to hold the gun in my face and not get pushed around. Now, starting from the elbows and going forward, that's where everything happens. That's where all the pressures and leverages are created to make a gun behave well in recoil. Starting at the elbows, what we want is elbows that are stiff but not locked. What does that mean? What is the easiest way to do that, right? So our elbows, if they're too bent, that's going to cause a problem. They're going to move, they're going to bounce around too much, right? So how do we make our elbows stiff? What I tell people is to conceptualize this, lock your elbows out and pull them back a little bit. So if I lock my elbows out fully and I pull it back a little bit, that gives me a healthy bend in the elbow. So if I do it from the front view here, right, that's locked out, that's a ½ inch back. Nice healthy bend. The elbows are always going to absorb recoil, absorb the shock of recoil, right? If you have something like this, where the line of the elbow is broken and goes up, what's going to happen is when the gun goes off, the elbows are going to bend anyway, and it's going to make the recoil appear to be more. If you feel like the recoil is more, you're going to push back with more effort, right? That's what we call energy leak, right? 9mm recoil is about 9 pounds of force, 40, 45 around 16, 17, right? If you lose some energy from efficiency like this, you might push the gun back down, like your 9 pounds of force back, you might push down 13 pounds, right? Oftentimes when we correct a student with this, and now they have the gun behaving correctly, they initially shoot low. And the reason why is because you have 9 going back, 13 going forward, and now that extra 4 gets into what we call an over return of the gun. So now back to the elbows, right? Push them all the way out to lock, pull it back. That's going to give you your ideal elbow position. You'll see the line is very straight. That's what we want. A straighter line in the elbows means the gun is going to go straight back and straight forward more consistently. Now, the next part with the elbows is if you pick an upside down horseshoe in your hands and you try to straighten it. You see how my thumbs turn towards each other and my elbow, the points of my elbows raise up a bit? You're going to do that on the gun, and what that's going to do is it's going to pinch towards the top, right? It's also going to make the elbow line a bit straighter and give you a little bit more vicing effect on the gun itself. Something that I tell students, when you have this elbow rotation and the straight elbow here, stiff but not locked, when recoil happens, the elbows still bend, but with everything else kind of locked in place properly and stiff, the hands actually push together a bit tighter during the part in the recoil cycle when you need it the most. So you actually get a little bit extra boost in your grip for free when you need it to actually be there. So that's very important. All right, upside down horseshoe, rotate. Now, that's the elbows. Now we go into the wrists. The wrists can articulate, they can move in a couple different ways. The key is that we are locking them in place, right? And the way that we lock them is through the forearm muscles. The easiest way to understand this is to cam your wrist down, right? So I could just angle my wrist down and it's not a problem. I'm already engaging my forearm muscle here. You can see that engaging just as a function of pushing the wrist down, right? That's not always comfortable for some people, right? So, and quite honestly, you don't need to do it that way if it's not comfortable. It's just easy for people to understand and do, right? Especially with the left hand, instead of keeping the wrist more straight, I can angle the wrist, right? For me, that's not a problem. For some people, it is. Now, if that is a problem and you prefer to keep your wrist angle more neutral, the benefit to a neutral wrist angle is that you have more grip strength, right? The benefit to a cammed wrist is it's easy to understand and it actually resists some of the muzzle rise, right? A neutral wrist angle will give you more power in your grip strength. The key is that if I am shaking my wrist loose right now and I grip as hard as I can, I automatically get the wrist locked, right? So that will help you either way. You can either cam it, keep it straight, and grip as hard as you can. Now, the firing hand is different. The firing hand is actually attached to the gun. So, if I try to angle my wrist all the way down, the gun basically goes out of view, right? The dot or the sights, they go out of view, right? I used to do something where I would aim, right? I would push the gun out of view and I would rotate my elbow and pull my shoulder back and I'd get this wrist angle by doing it that way, but that honestly is a bit complicated. So I came up with a better way, and the better way is this. Instead of applying pressure on all three of the fingers on the firing hand grip, I just focus my pressure towards the bottom two here. So what that does with the gun, right? Normally gripping it, apply pressure to the bottom forearm engages here, and now I get that wrist lock for free. Also, I can grip as hard as I want with these two fingers and it doesn't really interfere with my trigger finger. If you guys have ever gotten trigger freeze before, that's usually a symptom of the firing hand tensing too much. But really what it's a symptom of is this middle finger doing too much work. So if I do a little example here, right, watch my index finger. It's not really moving much when I move my pinky. A little bit, not much. My ring finger, it's barely moving at all. But once I start doing this, with my middle finger, it starts really moving around. So this finger is what causes most of that firing hand push, right? So by gripping at the bottom, I can really put as much pressure as I want and not interfere with the trigger finger operation and speed, right? So that's the wrists. Firing hand, gun position in the hand. If we have the forearm bone here, comes up, goes right into the palm. That's where I want the back strap of the palm to be, back strap of the gun to be, right in the palm. So now when I apply pressure down here, right, the gun is fully secured, right? And if I sit here and I press the trigger, right, the gun doesn't move. You can see that right there, it doesn't move. Now, if I adjust it and do the same thing, watch the gun. Same trigger press. Same trigger press causing it to move, right? So I adjust it back, hold it there, gun doesn't move anymore. That's because there's so much support behind the gun, it doesn't matter how hard you're pressing the trigger. It's supported with enough pressure that it can handle it. Okay? Now, for people with smaller hands, that you physically can't get to the spot and reach the trigger easily, what you're gonna do, you're gonna have to move the gun in a way that you don't, that's not ideal, but if you can think about moving your fingers into the palm, so I could do the same thing here, kind of press the fingers into the palm at an angle, and I get the same trigger press there, right? All I'm doing is I'm making sure it's secure. It's just a bit of an off angle. It's not preferred, but if you have to do it that way, that's what you have to do. As far as how hard we grip, with the support hand, we're gonna crush as hard as we can. Support hand is what does most of the recoil control. That's very important, right? With the firing hand, this is what has to happen. If you see here, the gun is wiggling in the hand, right? I have to grip hard enough that the gun stops wiggling. Now if you watch here, you can see the wrist is moving too. Apply a little bit more pressure at the bottom, and now the gun and the wrist and the hand all stayed connected. Right? That's how hard I have to hold it, and if I were to do this in a class with you, it would feel like a wet noodle handshake, like a wet fish handshake, whatever they call it, right? Really, really soft. However, how hard you need to grip it and how hard I actually grip it are different. How hard I actually grip it depends on what makes you comfortable. What makes you mentally comfortable to know that the gun is not going to move around in your hand. If you know the gun isn't going to move in your hand, something that we'll discuss in acclimation, the acclimation video, you'll feel more comfortable mentally, and then you'll relax everything that's not necessary for gripping the gun physically. You'll shoot faster and you'll shoot more accurate. So, how hard I have to grip it is that wet noodle handshake. How hard I actually grip it, I grip it almost as hard as I can with only these two fingers. And now as a result, I can hold this very tight and I can move my finger without any sort of blocking or hindrance. Right? Trigger freeze is a symptom of the whole hand tenses up so this joint locks in place. So that should take care of all the things that we need to talk about in terms of principles of grip. Now let's get on to the next lesson.